think people are afraid to address what he's really saying on so many levels. You're not going to hear Kamala Harris saying this or Tim Walz. You will hear crazy coming from Donald Trump and from JD Vance. And I think what you're seeing there is him actually reaching out to constituency again, just like with the Proud Boys, just like with the Oath Keepers, just like with these individuals when he said, stand back and stand by. This is the same kind of messaging that he likes to do. And it's really not that subtle anymore.
Well, if it's not that subtle as you see it, Denver, it does raise the question of whether the electorate actually takes him at his word when he says those things. What would you say to people who suggest Donald Trump is just not being serious? It's all just bluster.
First of all, it's a great question. Those people are lying. I mean, of course they take him at his word. They wouldn't be voting for him. And it's that simple, too. And, here's the reason, I'm part of Republicans for Harris, and there's a reason that we're reaching out to specific constituencies is because we are going against other constituencies, and, some of those constituencies are like flat earthers, those who believe that J6, the election was stolen, those who believe that there's that FEMA, there's actually conspiracy theories about FEMA around Hurricane Helene or Hurricane Milton, those idiots, right? And you're talking about too, I don't know if you guys saw the Tim Walz emails where, they're accusing him of the most vile things with made up emails that's coming out today. And I think that's what you're seeing is you have these disinformation constituencies and these radicalized constituencies, and then you have other people trying to reach out to a more sane and rational portion of the population.
It's interesting what happens when people lose trust in the arbiters of truth, right? Whether it's the media, whether it's the administration, the government as a whole here, Denver. So it's difficult to get a sense of where we're going with all this. There are reports in the Washington Post that armed militias are moving around western North Carolina trying to block FEMA from getting to certain places following Hurricane Helene. So it's hard to tell where the misinformation ends. But you know what your Republicans say when it comes to Donald Trump. You can talk to me all day long. You remember the outrage following the Access Hollywood tape, but we moved on. And the Donald Trump who was in the White House brought a good economy and no new wars. How do you respond to that?
Oh, goodness. That's pretty interesting. They talked about the Access Hollywood tape and that he just talks, right? He just talks a game, but he doesn't really mean it. Well, I think E. Jean Carroll would have, I think she would have an issue with that. He did exactly what he said he was going to do because he was found liable for sexual abuse. And he's a felon. When you talk about January 6th and, be there, it's going to be wild. Look at what he did to actually aggravate those type of conspiracy theories and those radicalizing types of memes that he put out there. And you just talked about FEMA, right? Armed groups or militias. He was part of fanning the flame there. Donald Trump is a conspiracy theorist, or he likes to radicalize people when he knows it's untrue. And both of those options are just awful for somebody who wants to be POTUS. So, again, it comes down to, I think this is about going against that type of disinformation on a level we have never seen. Social media has allowed it, but I just don't think Democrats, independents, and even the center right realize how strong the far right information ecosystem is.
So with all that said, Denver, we're now just 3 weeks out from Election Day. What are you potentially looking for or bracing for on that day and in the days that could follow, knowing it may be uncertain for some time who actually won the election and whether or not they're going to accept those results?
Listen, here's my greatest hope. I mean, and I'm glad you're asking me such easy questions today. Thanks, guys. Holy crap. These are tough. Wow, just so easy, just a walk in the park today. Here's my hope. I hope that anybody on the left, center, or center, independents, when this election is called one way or the other, they follow the norms of the United States Constitution and we allow for the peaceful transfer of power. The issue that you're going to have if Donald Trump wins or Donald Trump loses is you're going to have a far right activated, I think, type of violence centers. But it's not going to be at the Capitol. What my biggest worry is counting centers. It's election workers. It's state capitals. It's specific individuals now, right? It's actually going towards the very infrastructure of how the electoral votes are funneled upwards towards Congress. Those are the things that I worry about is this local, state, and county level efforts that are going on in these areas and these rises of militia movements, this rise of sort of this fantasy belief system that's driving people. I was just looking at the Rod of Iron Ministries with Mike Flynn. and they have the Babylon fire and they're screaming, fight, fight, fight. And that's all under Sean Moon, the son of Xiong Moon, who thinks the AR-15 is an instrument of God. That's the issue that we have right now, is that violence is in the air. It's being perpetuated. And just at the start of this, talking about Donald Trump's comments about the election, he's not being subtle, and he means it. And I think when we look at what he said in the past and what he's been convicted of as a felon and as being liable for sexual abuse, I think we see that he means what he says.
So with that said, though, I just want to get a little more specific. With your knowledge of
Sure.
January 6th, having advised the committee on this, are you of the mind then that we could see violence break out in state capitals around the country as opposed to here in Washington? And why would it be different this time?
I think I think the issue that you're going to have in state capitals, and when you're talking about specific counting centers, is that you have a very narrow pathway to victory for both candidates. You're talking about only a handful of states, and you're talking about counties within those states. And if you don't think that, those who are looking at the numbers, at the data, at the polls, at the statistics, they're looking at the voter registrations and the early voting in those areas, if they're not concentrating on those areas with legal challenges immediately, or an army of lawyers looking at every single aspect of this, I think people's heads are in the sand if they don't believe that. And I think when you talk about what's different this time is there's been a massive learning curve from January 6th to today. You're talking about, really a coordinated effort, but there was just enough dumb people, right, where that wasn't going to go off. But I think this time, I think they've learned that fighting from the inside is much more effective from fighting from the outside. And that's why you saw all these electoral type of issues going on, where you're seeing Moms for Liberty and these other groups trying to put candidates in these positions where they can actually affect the voting in those local areas. And I think that's what we need to worry about, is they've really, really have a more specific plan this time going forward.